They say the dead do not always rest in peace, not when they die with questions on their lips, not when their final breath is drowned in silence, unanswered. Welcome to Ghosts of Asia, a place where forgotten rituals still whisper through concrete walls, where ancient spirits linger in neon-lit cities, where the modern world collides with the old, and something always breaks. Tonight, we take you deep into the belly of Seoul, not the tourist streets or the gleaming towers, but a quiet, aging high-rise where the walls remember what the living wish to forget, where a landline phone rings at exactly 3:33 a.m., and on the other end is someone who should not exist. This is not just a ghost story. It is a story about what happens when we sever the thread between the living and the dead, when we move on too quickly, when we fail to honor the souls we leave behind. Some spirits do not cross over, some stay, and some call. This is the story of the girl who kept calling room 604, and of the woman who made the mistake of answering. Let us begin. Ji-won stood quietly in the middle of her new apartment, room 703, watching the city lights flicker through the large, dust-covered window. Outside, Seoul was alive, restless traffic below, neon signs blinking above the skyline like artificial constellations. But inside the room, it was still, the kind of stillness that wasn't peaceful, just hollow. She'd been in the apartment for less than 4 hours, and already something felt off. It wasn't the dust or the yellowed wallpaper or even the faint smell of old smoke that clung to the curtains. It was something harder to name, like the air itself hadn't moved in years, as if someone had exhaled their last breath in here, and the room had held it tight ever since. The realtor had been too eager to get her signature, offering a discount without much persuasion, talking fast, avoiding eye contact when she asked why the unit had stayed empty so long. "People prefer newer buildings now," he'd said, smiling thinly. "Nothing wrong with this one, solid bones." He never mentioned the scratches on the inside of the front door, or the phone. The phone was the one thing she hadn't noticed until just now. A beige landline sat quietly on the kitchen wall, half hidden behind a cabinet, its cord coiled like a sleeping centipede. She hadn't seen a corded phone in years, and certainly didn't expect one in an apartment like this. She walked over, tapped the receiver. No dial tone. Dead. She considered unplugging it, but something stopped her. She wasn't sure why. Instead, she turned off the kitchen light, drew the curtain in the bedroom, and lay down on the unfamiliar mattress. The room still smelled faintly of mildew and faded perfume, the kind of smell that belonged to someone else's memory. She was exhausted, and yet sleep refused her. It was past 3 a.m. when she finally started to drift, her body sinking into the bed, her thoughts beginning to blur, when the silence shattered. Ring! She sat up, heart thudding. The sound was so sharp, so sudden, it didn't feel real. Ring! It came again, loud, shrill, coming from the kitchen, from the wall-mounted landline. She stared into the dark. No one had that number. She didn't even know it existed. There was no reason for it to be connected. The phone didn't even have a signal earlier. Ring! She stood, slowly, bare feet on cold tile. The ring echoed like a warning in her ribs. When she reached the kitchen, the phone was still ringing. Its little red light blinked with every chime. She picked it up. Static. Just that at first. And then a voice. So faint, so fragile, she almost thought she imagined it. I need room 604. It's me. I'm still here. Then silence. The line went dead. Ji-won's hand trembled as she held the receiver away from her face. She checked the phone. No caller ID, no redial button. Just a lifeless tone, like before. She hung up. The apartment felt colder. She went to the thermostat, turned the knob. Nothing changed. The radiator hummed but gave no heat. She looked at the time. 3:33 a.m. Exactly. A coincidence. It had to be. By morning, the call felt like a dream. She told herself it was her exhaustion, nerves, the stress of moving in alone after years of rotating night shifts in rented rooms, the kind of exhaustion that plays tricks on your senses. She made coffee, ignored the phone, and began unpacking. But the strangeness continued. The downstairs neighbor, a tired woman in her 50s with deep-set eyes, refused to meet her gaze when they crossed paths by the elevator. When Ji-won offered a polite bow and smile, the woman just muttered something and hurried away. Inside the elevator, Ji-won noticed something peculiar. The panel listed floors: B1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then 7, her floor, and 8. But 6 looked newer, like the button had been replaced more recently. Its paint hadn't faded like the others. She pressed 6 out of curiosity. The elevator opened onto a dark hallway, unlit, cold, no sound. All the apartment doors had mail stuck in them, but one was different. 604. Its door was wrapped in yellow cation tape, now faded and curling. On the door frame, someone had pasted an old talisman, half torn, its ink smudged with time. As the doors closed, she felt something behind her, a pressure, a gaze. She didn't look back. That night, the call came again. 3:33. Same shrill ring, same voice. Room 604. Why won't anyone answer? She slammed the phone down. But this time, the ringing didn't stop. Even with the receiver off the hook, the phone kept shrieking over and over, as if screaming through its own silence, until the cord snapped from the wall. Only then, silence. Ji-won barely slept. In the morning, she went down to speak with building management. The old woman at the desk seemed reluctant to talk, but when Ji-won mentioned the phone and the number 604, her expression changed, like she'd heard those numbers in a nightmare before. "You should not answer," Miss Huang said, her voice low. "That room is sealed for a reason." "Why?" Ji-won asked. "What happened?" Miss Huang hesitated. Then, with a sigh, she pushed forward an old logbook. Inside was an old incident report, dated 8 years ago. Occupant, Yoon Eun-ha. Age, 17. Cause of death, decomposition too advanced to determine. Estimated time of death, 49 days before discovery. Ji-won read it again. 49 days. That's the traditional mourning period in Korean culture. The time it takes for a soul to pass on, unless they're trapped, unless no one comes for them. "No one performed rites," Miss Huang whispered. "No family claimed her body. She died alone, hungry, forgotten. Now she calls." Ji-won closed the book. Something cold curled in her stomach. That night she unplugged the phone completely, hid it in the cupboard beneath the sink. But at 3:33, her mobile phone rang. Blocked number. She picked it up. Static. Then, room 604.
and the line went dead.
Ji-won didn't sleep after the call. She sat in bed, motionless, her mobile phone still clutched in her hand. The glowing screen had returned to standby long ago, but her thoughts hadn't. They raced in tight, suffocating circles, caught between disbelief and dread. Someone had called her at 3:33 a.m. Someone who should not have access to any number. Someone who kept saying the same thing. Room 604. It was no longer just a room number. It was a presence now, a weight, something that pressed against the walls of her new life like a cold breath she couldn't unfeel. The next morning, Ji-won decided she couldn't pretend anymore, not with what she knew now, not after reading that incident report. There were too many pieces, disjointed but undeniably connected. She had to know the truth. She began with the basics. The building was old but not ancient, built in the late 1980s during one of Seoul's apartment booms. Back then, concrete towers sprouted like weeds, fast and cheap, often with little concern for spiritual layout or traditional practices. Some older Koreans still refused to live in buildings where the fourth floor wasn't skipped, a nod to tetraphobia, the belief that the number 4 sounded too much like death. But in this building, there was a fourth floor, and a sixth. Ji-won returned to the elevator, her fingers hovering once more over the 6. She pressed it. The door opened. The hallway was the same as before, dim, silent, faintly sour in smell. The lights flickered weakly, like they were trying not to wake something. Ji-won stepped out and approached room 604. Its door was still sealed. The tape flapped gently from the vent above, despite the air being dead still. The talisman above the frame had curled further, its ink now smeared to the point of illegibility. She leaned in. There was a faint hum. Not mechanical, not electric, something human. Breathing. She stepped back. Her hand trembled as she reached for the knob, just to test it, not to open it. But before her fingers touched the metal, she heard the unmistakable click of a door further down the hall. Someone was watching her. It was Unit 602. The door had cracked open, just slightly. A pair of eyes peeked out, older, bloodshot, framed by a face worn like dry paper. Ji-won cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said softly. Do you know what happened here, with room 604? The door creaked wider. A man stepped into the hallway, hunched, with trembling hands that held a cigarette already half burned. "She still calls, doesn't she?" he rasped. Ji-won froze. The man nodded slowly, as if confirming something long suspected. "I lived in 605 back then, before I left for hospice care. Came back recently. They sealed that door, but they never sealed the line." "You mean the phone?" "She died on the phone. Crawled toward it, left bloody prints on the tiles trying to call someone who never picked up. No one ever did, so she keeps trying." "I heard her." "Then she's chosen you?" Back in her apartment, Ji-won couldn't shake. She checked her mobile call history. No trace of the 3:33 a.m. call. She checked the landline again, still unplugged, still buried under the sink, but the silence around it felt like a lie. She turned on every light in the apartment, opened the windows, tried to let air, light, anything in. But the shadows clung to the corners. The hallway outside her front door remained unnaturally dark. She spent the day researching everything she could about the building: forums, archived news, online obituaries. At first, nothing. But then she found a thread on a paranormal forum posted 8 years ago, the same year Eun-ha died. Has anyone heard of the Soyun apartment haunting? I used to live in 703, had to move after just 3 months. The phone rang every night, same time, a girl asking for room 604. My dog refused to enter the hallway, always stared at the wall near the kitchen. The building was cursed after a girl died alone and no rites were performed. Her spirit lingers. She scrolled faster, heart racing. They say she chooses someone new every few years, always the person who lives right above her. Her unit. That night she tried to stay awake. She drank coffee, blared music, opened a book but couldn't focus on a single page. Still, at some point exhaustion claimed her, and just as the clock ticked to 3:33 a.m., she stirred. Knock, knock, knock. Not the phone. This time, the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. She waited, breath caught in her chest. Another knock. She creeped to the peephole. No one was there. Just the hallway, empty as ever, yet thick with something unseen. She locked every latch, drew every curtain, cursed herself for not moving into a newer building with better lighting, with cameras, with people. The quiet after the knocking was worse than the sound itself. It lasted until dawn. She went back to Unit 602 the next day. Knocked. No answer. She tried again. Then a third time. Nothing. The door still bore signs of life, shoes outside, cigarette tray full, but the man was gone, or hiding. She considered leaving, going to a hotel, but something tethered her, a curiosity too strong, a fear too specific. If she left without understanding this, would it follow her? Would the call find her wherever she went? That night, the phone didn't ring. Instead, she woke up to a soft sound, something brushing against her bedroom wall from the other side. She pressed her ear against it. It was a voice, a girl's, muffled, sobbing, repeating the same phrase again and again. Please, just answer. The voice behind the wall faded with the sunrise. Jiwan stayed crouched beside her bed, knees pulled to her chest, barely breathing, eyes locked on the wallpaper that separated her from the apartment below, from room 604. She no longer doubted the haunting. Doubt was a luxury she had passed. Now it was a matter of endurance, of survival, of understanding why the spirit had chosen her and what it wanted her to do. Because something in her gut told her it wasn't just about fear, it was about need. The next morning was heavy with unease. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror looked pale, thinner than it had a week ago. Dark circles under her eyes deepened by sleepless nights. She had stopped trying to convince herself that it was all in her head. The problem now was that it wasn't. The apartment's air had turned heavy. Not just the damp smell or the draft slipping under the door, but something deeper, a pressure in the atmosphere, like the weight of unspoken grief pressing against her chest. Jiwan avoided the phone all day. She didn't dare touch it again. But that night, even with the cord still unplugged, even with the receiver stored under the sink and the phone jack sealed with tape, she heard it. Ring. One ring. Not a second, not a third. Just one. Sharp and final, like a nail driven into her sanity. She turned her head slowly toward the kitchen. There was no phone, and yet the sound had come from the same wall. By the time the clock struck midnight, Jiwan knew sleep would not come. She turned on every light, sat with her back against the headboard, wrapped in a blanket like armor, holding her mobile in one hand, a flashlight in the other. When the time reached 3:33 a.m., the air in the room shifted again. It was colder. Not physically. The thermostat read the same, but in sensation. A creeping, damp cold that didn't need temperature to freeze her from the inside. And then, the intercom buzzed. Ji-won jumped, nearly dropping the flashlight. The wall-mounted unit in the hallway, the one no one ever used, let out a short, sharp buzz. Someone was downstairs. She stepped toward it, pressed the button. Hello? Silence. Then, I need to speak to room 604. The same voice, but this time not from the phone, from the intercom. She didn't press anything, didn't speak. She just stared at the black and white monitor where static flickered like a dying star. And then, a shadow moved across the screen. Just a flicker, a suggestion of a figure, but not on the ground floor. It was inside the building. She turned off the intercom and backed away. When she returned to the bedroom, the closet door was open. She was sure she had closed it. Inside, the air smelled different. Dust, old fabric, and something else, faint and sharp, like iron. She stepped closer and reached up to touch the shelf above. Her fingers brushed something cold and hard. She pulled it down. It was a handset, a phone receiver, but not hers. This one was older, yellowed with age, covered in a film of sticky dust, and tucked beneath it was a crumpled piece of paper. She unfolded it with shaking hands. On it, in smeared ink, were 4 numbers scrawled over and over again. 604, 604, 604, 604. And beneath them, a single sentence. Why won't you answer? The next morning she went back to the front office. Miss Huang was not there. A younger woman sat behind the desk instead. She looked up, startled, when Ji-won approached. Ah, you're the tenant in 703, right? Ji-won nodded. Where's the older woman, Miss Huang? The girl hesitated. She passed away last night. Ji-won stared. What? Heart failure, she said softly. She was found in her apartment around 4 a.m. by her daughter. I'm sorry if you were close. Ji-won wasn't close, but the timing made her stomach twist. She had heard the voice at 3:33 a.m. Miss Huang had died shortly after. Was it coincidence? Or was this ghost punishing anyone who remembered her but didn't help her? Back in her room, the phone was back on the wall, reattached, reconnected. The cord was whole, the base unit mounted. She stood frozen in the kitchen doorway staring at it. She hadn't reconnected it, hadn't touched it since hiding it days ago, but it was back, like it never left. She picked up the receiver. It was warm. Not plastic warm, not electrically warm. Warm, like a hand had just been holding it. She lifted it to her ear. This time, there was no static, no voice, just breathing. Wet, shallow breathing. She hung up fast and backed away. That evening, she left the building. She needed air, noise, people. She wandered the neighborhood streets like a sleepwalker, ending up in a tiny tea shop tucked beneath the staircase. An elderly man sat alone at a back table, reading a book of Buddhist chants. A small shrine flickered beside him, incense rising toward the ceiling like smoke signals to forgotten gods. He ordered ginger tea and sat in the farthest corner. When the man looked up and caught her eyes, something changed in his expression. He closed the book, stood, walked to her table without a word. You live in the building with the dead girl, he said. Ji-won's heart stopped. Room 703, above her. He added. She nodded, too stunned to speak. You've heard her, haven't you? She swallowed. She keeps calling. Because she died unheard. The call wasn't answered in time, and the rites, they were never performed. She's angry? The man shook his head slowly. No, worse, she's lonely. He sat with her for nearly an hour, explained the beliefs that still lived in shadows, ignored by the modern world, the way spirits who die alone, without family, without final rites, wander in confusion. The dead are drawn to patterns, to loops, and the call she made, it never ended. Even in death, she's still waiting for someone to pick up. So, what do I do? How do I stop it? You don't stop it. You answer it, properly. She stared at him. Bring her what she never received, a final call, and a voice that says, you are not forgotten. Only then will she hang up. That night, Jiwan returned home and found something new. Taped to her front door was a photo, a girl's face, pale, smiling faintly, school uniform, long dark hair. On the back, Yoon En-ha, class of 2013. No note, no explanation, just the picture. She brought it inside, propped it up on the table, and when 3:33 a.m. came again, she picked up the phone. This time, she spoke first. Hello? Static. A pause. Then, room 604? Yes, Jiwan whispered. I'm here. Finally, the voice said. I see you, it added. Thank you. Then silence. But this time, peaceful. No click, no cutoff. Just silence, like the end of a long breath. The silence after the call wasn't comforting. It was hollow, as if something had ended, but not finished. Jiwan sat on the floor of her kitchen, the phone still in her lap, the photograph of Yoon En-ha staring back at her from the table. That soft smile, the tilt of her head, the kind of school portrait taken before graduation, before abandonment, before rot. I see you. That's what the girl had said. Not thank you, not goodbye, but I see you. Jiwan didn't know if that meant the haunting was over or if it had only begun. She spent the next day at the National Library. She had to know more, not rumors, not whispers, but facts. It took hours of digging, countless misfiled records, and a clerk with a loose tongue, but eventually she found it. A death report. Yoon En-ha, 17, found deceased in room 604 of Soyun Apartments, Unit 6F. Date of discovery? August 9th. Estimated time of death, June 21st. 49 days, exactly the length of the traditional Korean mourning period, the time a soul is believed to linger between life and afterlife, awaiting prayer, offerings, closure. But En-ha had received none. No funeral, no jesa, no monk. Her body had been cremated anonymously, the ashes unclaimed. She had simply vanished from the world, quietly, without resistance. The police report was cold and clinical. No signs of forced entry, no suicide note recovered. Neighbors report foul odor. Cause of death listed as unknown due to advanced decomposition. Victim was found near a disconnected landline phone. Body partially mummified due to summer heat and ventilation pattern. That was all. No headlines, No photos, no justice. Just a forgotten girl who died trying to reach someone, anyone, on a dead phone line. Juwon took a walk after leaving the library. The air outside felt too bright, too alive. She watched children play near a subway entrance, their laughter echoing against concrete. Enha had once been that small, that alive. Someone's daughter, someone's classmate. What had happened in her life that led her to die in silence, 2 floors below where Jiwon now lived? She remembered what the old man in the tea shop had said. Spirits are drawn to patterns. She called, no one answered, so she keeps calling. Maybe she wasn't angry at all. Maybe she just didn't know she was dead. That night, Juwon searched her own apartment more thoroughly. She went room to room, drawer to drawer, not sure what she was looking for, only knowing she hadn't found everything yet. The closet in the bedroom still bothered her, the way the air felt heavier inside it, the faint sour smell behind the back wall. She topped the panel, hollow. She ran her fingers along the inside frame and found a tiny gap where the drywall bowed inward. She pressed. Click. A panel opened inward with a reluctant creak, revealing a small, square compartment between walls. Inside was a box. Cardboard. Water-stained. She pulled it out with shaken hands. Inside were personal belongings, things that hadn't been discarded, only hidden. A cracked pink flip phone, a photo album warped from moisture, a dried bouquet of pressed flowers, and a folded school uniform. And at the bottom, a journal. She opened the book. The ink was smeared in places, but legible. Each entry was short, quiet, painfully restrained. June 2. I heard Mom remarried. No one told me directly. I found out from an aunt. I didn't cry. I just lay down and listened to the fan. June 5. Someone knocked but didn't wait. It was a parcel. I didn't open it. June 10. The phone is disconnected. The internet too. I guess the payments bounced. I don't care. June 17. I've been saving the last of the rice. I boil it with water to make juke. Tastes like sadness. June 20. I had a dream. I was on a train and it wouldn't stop. Everyone got off, but I stayed. I didn't know where I was going. June 21. I tried to call someone. Anyone. The phone didn't ring. I waited. I'm still waiting. The final entry had no date, no words, just a jagged spiral scribbled in pencil as if she had kept turning her hand in the same motion over and over until the page tore. She stared at the last page for a long time. She had never cried reading a journal before. But this was a record of disappearance. Not just physical, emotional, spiritual. Each page was another footstep into oblivion. And now that oblivion had climbed back up the stairs to knock on her door, whispering into her intercom, breathing through her phone. The next day, Juwon called the police precinct listed in the death report. She asked about Enna's belongings, about the ashes. The officer was indifferent. We don't keep track of cremains. Unclaimed remains go to the municipal columbarium. No family showed up, so we marked it as closed. Can I visit? She asked. A pause. Are you family? Juwon almost said no, but something inside her, perhaps guilt, perhaps something deeper, answered first. Yes, I'm the only one left. The columbarium was on the outskirts of the city, quiet, cold. She had never been to one alone. A staff member guided her through rows of gray shelves, box after box, each labeled with a name, a date, and then finally, Yoon Enha, 1996, 2013, unclaimed. A single white urn, no photo, no flowers, just dust, time, and silence. She stood there for a long time. No prayers, no tears, just the presence of two girls, one alive and one forgotten, both tethered by a single unanswered call. When she returned home that evening, she brought offerings. She didn't know the proper rituals, didn't grow up religious, but she remembered what her grandmother used to do during Jesa. She placed rice, fruit, and incense on a small wooden tray. She lit a candle. She set the photo of Enha beside it, and then she spoke, voice trembling. "I don't know your favorite food, or your favorite song, or what kind of dreams you had. I don't even know what your voice really sounded like, except when you asked for room 604, but I know you were here, and I know you were alone. You don't have to be anymore." She bowed her head. The candle flickered. The air stilled. And for the first time, there was no sound at 3:33 a.m. No phone, no knock, no voice. Just sleep. Unbroken. For the first time in weeks, Jiwon slept through the night. No phone, no voice, no dreams filled with spirals, shadows, or static. Only quiet. But in the morning, the quiet felt too heavy, like something waiting beneath the floorboards, something not gone, only watching. She made coffee, half expecting the phone to ring the moment she turned her back, but it didn't. The landline was still on the wall, silent, still. A strange kind of truce. Yet something in her chest said it wasn't over, just changed. She left the apartment around noon. The air outside was thick with spring humidity, the kind that made the city feel like it was sweating. She welcomed the noise of traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of vendors calling from food carts. She needed normalcy, movement, proof that life continued outside of haunted rooms. Jiwon had planned to visit the convenience store across the block, just a quick errand. But as she reached the elevator, she hesitated. The metal doors were closed, scratched, the panel slightly tilted as if someone had tried to pry it open once. She pressed the down button. It lit up. The motor groaned. The elevator arrived. The doors opened with a reluctant sigh. She stepped inside. The fluorescent lights inside the elevator flickered once, twice, then steadied. She pressed B1, the basement level. She didn't need to go there, but curiosity pulled her finger there instead of 1. As the elevator descended, a low hum filled the space. Not the mechanical kind, something deeper, faint, hollow, like breathing, just out of sync with her own. She stared at the floor numbers lighting up, 6, 5, 4, and then, without warning, the elevator stopped. 6F. It paused. The doors opened. Jiwon hadn't pressed anything. She hadn't even touched the panel since selecting B1. She stared out into the hallway. It was dark, as always, unlit, lifeless. The air seeping in from the corridor was colder than it should have been, but yet the scent was unmistakable. Sweet rot, the smell of old flowers left too long in stagnant water, of mildew on forgotten fabric, of something trying to be remembered. Then she saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the doorway of room 604. It wasn't clear at first, more shape than person. A girl, hair long and black, draped forward like wet silk, head tilted as if listening. She stood perfectly still, bare feet on the dusty concrete floor. Ji-won didn't move, didn't breathe. The figure took a step forward, not toward her, but toward the phone mounted on the wall beside the door of 604. It wasn't even connected, but the girl lifted the receiver anyway, pressed it to her ear. Her mouth didn't move, but Ji-won heard the voice clearly. "Room 703, please pick up." And then, the girl turned her head. Not all at once, slowly, unnaturally, bone by bone, until her face faced the elevator. But there were no eyes, just black voids where her gaze should have been. Ji-won hit the closed door button with shaking hands. The door shut slowly, too slowly, groaning like something resisting them from outside. The elevator jerked and descended again. She didn't look back. She made it to the ground floor, walked out into the sunlight like a diver surfacing for air. Her legs shook, her chest was tight. She didn't go to the store. She just stood there, under the concrete awning of the apartment building, trying to forget the face without eyes, the voice that spoke without lips. The call was still happening, even if the phone didn't ring. Back in her apartment, she avoided the mirrors. Something about her reflection unsettled her lately, not because she looked different, but because sometimes the reflection didn't move exactly with her, like it lagged or blinked too slowly. She unplugged the bathroom light, washed her face in the dark. She needed answers, and not from books, not from online forums, from the building itself. That evening, she waited until the hallway was quiet, around 11:45 p.m. Then she crept out of room 703, flashlight in hand, notebook tucked under her arm. She took the stairs this time, not the elevator. Each step downward felt like a descent into a buried memory. On 6F, she paused. The corridor was darker than the others, as if the building had long given up trying to light this floor. She walked slowly toward room 604. The door was still taped, still bearing the old talisman, now rotted and yellow. But this time, something was different. A small piece of paper had been slid under the door. Ji-won knelt and pulled it out. It was a page torn from a school notebook, written in blue pen. "Today I heard someone upstairs. They were moving around, laughing. Maybe I'm not the only one left after all. I hope they answer." No name, no date, but she recognized the handwriting from the journal she had found. It was Inha's. Ji-won sat down against the wall, heart pounding. She pulled out her notebook and began to write. Not notes, not research, not records. A letter to Inha. She wrote, "I hear you. I see you. I'm sorry I wasn't there before. I don't know why the world turned away from you, why the door stayed closed for so long, but I'm here now, and I won't leave." She folded the letter and slid it beneath the door of 604. Then she stood, bowed once, and walked back up to 703. That night, at 3:33 a.m., the phone didn't ring, but the elevator did. It groaned into motion all on its own. Ji-won sat up in bed and listened as the machinery hummed, moving floor by floor. She stepped out into the hallway. The digital display above the elevator door blinked. 6F. Then 7F. and then the doors opened. Empty. But on the floor of the elevator was her letter. Folded. Unopened. She picked it up with trembling hands. On the back, written in new shaky ink, was one sentence. "I'm not alone anymore." The words on the folded letter stayed with Ji-won long after the elevator door closed. "I'm not alone anymore." It should have been comforting, a sign of peace, but it didn't feel like closure. It felt like attachment, as if the spirit had found something or someone to hold on to again, and that someone was her. The days that followed were strangely calm. The apartment no longer whispered. No static from the walls, no phone calls, no flickering lights. Ji-won slept, ate, breathed easier. But the silence felt loaded, not empty, but suspended, like the pause between inhaling and exhaling. Something still waited beneath the stillness. She had honored Eun-ha in the only way she knew how, speaking to her, listening, writing, remembering. But deep in her gut, she knew it wasn't enough. Not for a girl whose death had been so profoundly unseen. She had been forgotten by her family, ignored by her neighbors, erased by officials, and discarded by ritual. What was missing was the offering. Not the tray Ji-won had placed with incense and apples, not the tea she'd left by the photo. The real offering, the rite. That evening, she returned to the elderly man's tea shop beneath the subway stairs. He was there, as always, seated beneath a dim bulb, incense burning beside a small clay statue of the Buddha. When he saw her, he didn't speak. He simply gestured to the chair across from him. Ji-won sat, folded her hands in her lap. She's still there, quieter, but still here. The man nodded. She was never angry, just unfinished. I gave her food, candles, words, but I don't think she's moved on. The old man leaned forward. Because words and food are not enough when the soul is trapped by abandonment. Her spirit cannot be soothed until the path is opened. Ji-won frowned. The path? The road home, he said. In Korean tradition, when someone dies alone and no rites are held, their soul lingers in confusion. They wander the in-between, unaware they've died, clinging to memory and routine. We must guide them. Like a ritual? A spirit ritual. Not temple, not formal. Something intimate, something honest. Offerings tied to her life, personal things, memory anchors, and a final prayer, not from a stranger, but from someone who saw her. Ji-won looked down at her hands. I never knew her. I didn't even live here when she died. The old man smiled faintly. And yet she chose you. That means something. Sometimes the living don't have to know the dead, only witness them. That night, Ji-won began preparing. She pulled out the box of Eun-ha's belongings she had hidden in her closet wall. The flip phone, the dried flowers, the stained uniform, the journal. These weren't just artifacts, they were pieces of her spirit, echoes left behind. She cleaned the items carefully, wrapped them in fresh linen. She placed the phone beside a small battery pack and turned it on. Amazingly, the screen flickered. One photo remained.
pixelated and dark, but still visible. Unha smiling faintly in what looked like a school corridor. Headphones around her neck, eyes tired but kind. Jiwon held the phone gently, like it might shatter if she breathed too hard. Then she gathered everything and laid them out on a small tray. She waited until the building was asleep. No footsteps in the halls, no lights beneath doors. Then she carried the tray to room 604. The door remained sealed, the talisman hung like a brittle leaf above the frame. She placed the tray gently against the door. Then, using chalk, she drew a line of salt across the threshold, just like her grandmother had once done during Chuseok, to keep spirits from wandering too far before being properly honored. Finally, she lit a single white candle and placed it in the center of the tray. Its flame danced gently, unaffected by wind or breath. And then she knelt. She didn't chant, didn't read scripture. She just spoke, softly, sincerely. Unha, I don't know where you were going that day. I don't know what you were hoping for, but I know no one was there when you needed them. I know the world forgot you, but I see you now. I've heard your voice. I've read your words. I know you wanted to be found. You don't have to keep calling. You don't have to stay. This is your offering, your altar, your goodbye. The candle flickered once, and then it went out. Not from wind, not from breath, just extinguished, quietly, as if accepted. Jiwon waited. A minute passed, then another, and then something stirred. Not sound, not movement, but presence. A warmth passed through her chest, followed by a sudden, inexplicable calm, like standing under sunlight after a long shadow. She heard a whisper, not aloud, not even through the phone. Inside. Thank you. She returned to her apartment in silence. She didn't look back. The hallway on 6F remained dark, but it no longer felt cold. The next morning, the tray outside room 604 was gone. Every item, the candle, the chalk, even the salt line, all of it vanished. The only thing left behind was a single pressed flower, delicate, pink, taped gently to her door. That night, the phone remained quiet. The elevator moved normally. The intercom stayed silent. And in her sleep, Jiwon dreamed. She stood on a train platform beneath a pale gray sky, and beside her, Unha, still in her uniform, still thin, still quiet, but not hollow anymore. She turned to Jiwon and smiled. This time, she said, I know where I'm going. And then the train arrived, and she stepped aboard, without looking back.
The days after the ritual passed quietly, almost too quietly. No whispers, no rings, no flickers. Room 604 remained sealed, and for the first time, Jiwon could breathe. She wanted to believe it was over. But peace in a building like this felt like borrowed time, the kind that could be taken back. It began with the scratching, faint at first, a soft rustling from within her walls, like something small dragging across plaster. She told herself it was the pipes, or mice, or maybe the building settling as old buildings tend to do. But then it came again, at 3:33 a.m. exactly. A soft scratch, then a slow dragging sound, like fingernails tracing the inside of a coffin. She sat up in bed, holding her breath. The sound moved from the wall beside her bed to the wall in the kitchen, then to the floor beneath her, and then it stopped. The next night, she heard whispering. This time, it wasn't faint. It was intentional. Soft voices, layered, overlapping, murmuring in low tones through the walls, as if a conversation was happening inches away, but just out of understanding. She pressed her ear to the kitchen wall, and for a moment, she heard her own name. Ji-won. The sound wasn't angry or pleading. It was mournful, as if someone was trying to warn her. She visited the management office again the next morning. The younger woman, the one who had replaced Ms. Wang, greeted her with a tight smile. Ji-won leaned forward. "Can I ask something strange?" she said. The woman blinked, then nodded. "Everyone does." Ji-won hesitated. "Has anyone ever complained about the walls? Hearing things?" The woman's smile faded. She leaned back slightly in her chair. 703? She asked. Ji-won nodded. The woman glanced around, then lowered her voice. "People don't stay in that unit for long, maybe a few months at most. Then they break the lease or vanish. Why?" "They all say the same thing. The walls whisper, and they feel watched." Ji-won looked down at the floor. "Watched from where?" The woman shrugged. "From below." That evening, Ji-won stood in the center of her apartment and listened. Really listened. There was something in the silence, a density, a pressure behind the drywall, like breath held in too long. She walked from room to room, pressing her palm to every surface, feeling for warmth, for vibration. She reached the hallway near her closet and stopped. It was colder here. She tapped lightly on the wall, and something tapped back. She stepped back, heart pounding. Her hand trembled as she retrieved the flashlight from the drawer. She returned to the wall, held her breath, tapped again. Tap, tap, tap. A pause, then tap, tap. The rhythm was different, like someone trying to reply. Ji-won whispered, "Is someone there?" No answer. She leaned in closer, and then a soft voice, muffled and strained, as if pushed through concrete. "She's not the only one." Ji-won stumbled back. She hadn't imagined that. That night she dreamed of the hallway between floors, a narrow passage running behind the walls where no blueprints ever marked it, just an endless corridor of pipes and dust and flickering lights. In the dream, she walked barefoot down that corridor. Each step echoed behind her, not in repetition, but in response. Someone following. When she turned, there were faces in the walls, pressed against the surface, straining, eyes open, mouths stitched shut. She woke in a sweat. The ceiling above her was damp. Water damage or something else had begun to stain it in the shape of a handprint. She tried to convince herself it was just residual fear, residual memory, the afterimage of Ino's presence lingering in her mind and in the space around her. But deep down she knew it wasn't just Ina anymore. Something had been awakened, and not all spirits are lonely.
Some are hungry. Desperate for clarity, she returned to the tea shop, but the old man was gone. The shop was closed. A metal shutter pulled down. A small handwritten sign read, "Closed for mourning. Owner passed away in sleep." The date, 3 nights ago. The same night, Ji-won heard the voices return. She wandered the city aimlessly for hours, afraid to go home, afraid not to. She called her mother, a conversation filled with shallow proletaries and long silences. Her mother didn't ask where she was living, didn't ask if she was well. The call ended with a simple, "Take care of yourself," as it always did. Disconnected, like Ina's line, like everyone in that building. Ji-won returned to the apartment at dusk. The hallway to her unit was darker than usual. Half the lights were out, buzzing faintly with that low electric hum that seems to mimic whispering if you stand too close. She paused at her door, listened. No sound, no breath. She stepped inside, and on her kitchen table was the pressed flower, the same one she had found after the offering, now wilted, dry. But beneath it, a new note, written in the same hand as before. There are others, still waiting, still calling. Ji-won didn't sleep that night. She sat at the table, staring at the flower and note, the phone unplugged yet humming faintly as if trying to breathe. And in the walls, just behind the kitchen sink, the voices began again. But this time, they didn't whisper her name. They said another. Over and over. So-yeon, So-yeon, So-yeon. A name she had never heard, yet spoken with the same sorrow as Ina's had been. A different girl, a different ghost. And Ji-won suddenly understood. The building didn't just bury one story, it buried many. And room 604 was just one of the doors.
The walls didn't stop whispering after that night. Only the name changed. So-yeon, whispered softly, repeated gently, as if coaxing the name back into memory. Ji-won had never known anyone by that name, not in her life, not in the apartment. But the voices behind the wall knew it intimately, said it like a song, said it like regret. She wrote it down, So-young, then circled it. One ghost had been calling for years. Now another had started. She returned to the management office the next day. The receptionist looked surprised to see her again, and maybe a little nervous. Ji-won leaned forward, voice low. "I need to know who lived in my apartment before me." The woman stiffened. 703? Ji-won nodded. The woman sighed, turned to her computer and typed for a while. And she frowned. That unit's had a lot of turnover. "How many?" Ji-won asked. She clicked through more files. 10 tenants in the last 6 years. And before that? The woman hesitated. There was one long-term resident before the turnover began. She lived there for about 8 years. Ji-won leaned closer. What was her name? The woman checked the screen again. Kim So-young. The air left Ji-won's lungs. So-young. She whispered. What happened to her? The woman frowned again. She died in the apartment. How? A pause. Then, gas leak. Or maybe suicide. It wasn't clear. They said she had no visitors for weeks. No family came to collect her. The building paid for the cleanup. What year? 2015. The year after Eunha's death.
Another girl, another silence, another body found too late. Ji-won left the office shaking. The pattern was forming in her mind now, no longer just intuition. This building didn't just contain ghosts, it created them. Women, girls, living alone, dying unseen, left behind, no rites, no mourning, just the walls and the whispering. She returned home with trembling hands. Her unit felt different now, heavier, not haunted by one spirit, but many, stacked like shadows on top of each other, echoing through the pipes and drywall. She turned off every light, sat in silence, and listened. This time the voices came quickly. Not one, not two, but many, murmuring, weeping, repeating fragments of words, memories, names. So-young, So-young, Mireille, Mireille, Ha-jin, Ha-jin. I'm still here. Is anyone there? Please, please. It wasn't just room 604. It wasn't just the 6th floor. It was the building. She began to dig. Late into the night, she scoured old news forums, housing complaint boards, obscure police logs. And there it was, all of it, buried in the data like bones under a perfect lawn. Yoon Eun-ha, 2013, room 604, found after 49 days. Kim So-young, 2015, room 703, dead from gas inhalation. Park Hae-jin, 2017, room 502, reported missing, found deceased in utility stairwell, building never disclosed. Lee Mi-rae, 2020, room 805, apparent fall from window, no witnesses, ruled accidental. And the comments, always anonymous, always short. That building is cursed. Girls go there to disappear. The walls remember everything. Ji-won printed out every article, every thread. She laid them on her floor, pinned the photos, drew lines between the units, the years, the patterns. They were all the same type. Young, alone, forgotten. No family to claim them, no rights to release them, no legacy, only residue. The building had absorbed their deaths like concrete soaks blood, dry on the surface, but permanent beneath. That night, the elevator opened on its own again. She didn't go to it. She watched from her door, heart hammering. The display blinked. 6F, 7F, 8F. And then it stopped. The doors remained open, no one visible inside. But the scent drifted down the hall. Old shampoo, faint perfume, and something else. Mildew, decay. The air grew heavy. The lights flickered. And the voices began again. But this time, they weren't behind the walls. They were in the hallway. She was us. You heard her. Now you hear us. Will you leave us too? Ji-won stepped back inside and shut her door. But the voices seeped in. Through the vents, through the ceiling, through her mind. She dropped to her knees, hands over her ears, whispering over and over, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." When she opened her eyes, hours had passed. It was morning. And on her floor, beside her, was a single object. A SIM card, tiny, plastic, left without explanation. She placed it on the table, stared at it. And when the phone rang again, her mobile phone this time, not the landline, the screen showed unknown SIM. She answered. Only static. Then layered voices, not speaking, but weeping. All of them. Together. And then one voice. We just wanted someone to stay.
Ji-won stopped opening the windows. The outside world had begun to feel irrelevant, too distant from what was happening inside the apartment walls. The city still moved, still buzzed, still breathed in bright neon pulses. But in here, time didn't pass normally. It hovered. She kept the lights low, the curtains drawn. Noise only invited attention, and attention brought the voices. The SIM card still sat untouched on her table, silent but undeniable. She had heard them, all of them. Their grief, their hunger, their echo. They didn't want to hurt her, but they didn't want to let her go either. It was the building's repairman who first mentioned the man in the white gloves. Ji-won ran into him by the elevator while heading to the corner store, trying to gather the courage just to leave the building. He was a wiry older man with creased hands and a face too quiet for someone who spent all day fixing things that broke on their own. She nodded politely. He nodded back. Then he said, 703, that's yours, isn't it? She blinked. Yes. He paused, looked around the hallway. You shouldn't stay too long. Ji-won's throat tightened. Why? He lowered his voice. Because she talks to you. That's how it starts. She? They. But it always begins with one. He looked at her, eyes heavy. You're not the first. You won't be the last. I've seen this before. She hesitated. Have you seen the girl from 604? The repairman stared down the hallway as if seeing something she couldn't. I've seen more than one. He stepped into the elevator, pressed the button, then said over his shoulder, If you really want answers, talk to the man with the white gloves. He's the only one who tried to seal the line. And then the doors closed. She tried asking the building management who he meant. The receptionist didn't know, or pretended not to. So Ji-won returned to the forums, the dusty corners of the internet where conspiracy met memory. She searched keywords: Soyeon apartment, room 703, white gloves, telephone ritual, girl ghost, cursed building. And eventually, deep within a comment thread from over a decade ago, she found it. There was an old tenant, name might have been Beck, used to live in 703 back in 2009, said he heard a girl's voice through the landline, said she called every night at 3:33. He went crazy, tried to seal the phone with salt, wires, glue, said he saw her in the mirror once, in gloves, white gloves, like she was trying to hide her hands. Last anyone heard, he moved to a temple in Gongwon, said the spirits were louder in the cities. Ji-won copied the address someone had posted below. She didn't hesitate. The next morning, she packed a small bag and boarded a train eastward. The countryside opened like a wound, green hills and gray skies peeling away from Seoul's noise. The temple was quiet, empty of tourists, tucked behind pine trees and old stone steps. The man she was looking for was already waiting. He sat on a wooden bench, feeding stray cats, dressed in pale robes. Thin white gloves covered his hands. His hair was gray, long, but his eyes were sharp. "You're the one they've chosen," he said before she even introduced herself. Ji-won froze.
How did you know?
He smiled gently. Because they called me once too, and I answered. She sat beside him, slowly. The wind moved through the trees like a breath. You lived in 703. A long time ago, he nodded. Back when the phone first rang. What did she want? Not just her, he said softly. They all called eventually, but it began with a girl who died in room 604. I never saw her face, only her hands, wrapped in white cloth. I thought she was hiding something. I was wrong. What was she doing? She was reaching. He told her everything. How the first call came, how he answered, how the voice begged for room 604, then another voice, then another, different names, different tones, always at 3:33 a.m. He tried to ignore them, but they grew louder, entered his dreams, entered his body. He lost weight, lost time, until one night he looked in the mirror and saw a girl's reflection where his should have been. She wore white gloves because her hands had decayed. She had waited too long to be found. She didn't want me to see her that way, but I did. What did you do? I sealed the phone, he said. Wrapped the cord in red string, salted the base, glued the receiver shut. I even taped prayers to the wall. Did it stop? He shook his head. They don't want silence. They want witnesses. As long as the building stands, they will echo through its wires and walls. The phone is not the door. You are. Jiwon sat in silence, eyes stinging. Then what can I do? The man turned toward her. Don't seal them out, he said. Listen, witness, but don't let them in too deep. They need a voice, not a vessel. He pulled off one glove. His hand was scarred, burned, discolored, trembling slightly. I let one in. She stayed too long. Jiwon stared. How did you survive? I left, he whispered, but not all of me came with. He handed her a folded cloth, old, worn. Inside it was a talisman. For your door, not to keep them out, just to remind them you know. That night, Jiwon returned to her apartment. She placed the talisman on her doorframe, not to banish the voices, not to silence the dead, but to acknowledge them. She turned off the lights, lit a candle, and waited. At 3:33 a.m., the phone rang. She answered. Static. Then, a voice she didn't recognize. A girl. Do you remember me? Jiwon closed her eyes. No, but I will. The line clicked, and the walls sighed. The talisman on her door remained untouched. No tears, no burns, no ash. It held, but it didn't keep the voices away. And maybe it wasn't supposed to. After meeting the man with the white gloves, Jiwon understood something she hadn't before. The ghosts in this building didn't want to terrify her. They wanted to be acknowledged, to be known, to be seen. But there was something else now, something deeper. A feeling that haunted her more than the whispers ever could. She was forgetting where the boundary lay, between her thoughts and theirs, between their sorrow and her own. Every night they came closer, not louder, not angrier, just closer. She started talking to them. Not aloud, not always, but in whispers, in the way someone talks to an empty chair long after the person who once filled it is gone. She spoke their names: Unha, Soyeon, Heijin, Mireille. She wrote them on paper, burned the pages, watched the ash curl like breath against the ceiling. Each night she offered something: a song, a folded crane, a sip of barley tea, an old photo torn from a magazine pressed into the hallway floor. She wasn't following a manual. This wasn't a ritual from a book. It was instinct. Grief speaking to grief. And yet, something still felt incomplete. On the third night of offerings, the hallway grew colder. Not the usual draft. This was different. A temperature that clung to her bones even under layers of clothes. A kind of ancient cold, one that felt personal. And it brought with it something else. Sound. Not voices, not scratching. Chimes. Delicate, metallic, faint. Coming from the closet in her bedroom. She opened it slowly. The space inside was as she'd left it. Winter coat, broom, the box of old belongings she'd retrieved weeks ago. But something was different. The back panel, the one she had once opened to find Unha's journal, was ajar, just slightly, as if something had pushed it open from within. She pulled it back, breath held, and inside was something new, a second box, this one wrapped in faded silk, yellowed with age. On the lid, in hand-brushed ink, one word: Ushik, ritual. Inside the box were ritual items, traditional: a white cloth, a bowl of dried beans, a small wooden comb, a paper effigy folded carefully in the shape of a kneeling girl, and a handwritten note. Jiwon unfolded it with trembling fingers. For those who died unseen, comb the hair, light the flame, call their names. Do not break the silence, do not look away until the water boils. She didn't know who wrote it or when, but it was clear. Someone had once tried to perform a spirit-pacifying ritual in this apartment, and they never finished. That night, Jiwon prepared everything carefully. She laid the items on a low table in the living room, turned off every light, unplugged the landline, though she knew that no longer mattered. She filled a metal pot with water and set it atop an old camping burner. A single match lit the flame. Then she took the comb, and with slow, deliberate hands, she began combing the hair of the paper effigy. She didn't speak, didn't blink, only breathed. The flames danced, the water began to stir, and then the voices came. Not from the walls this time, not from the phone, from the room itself. Soft whispers swirled like wind in a cave. They didn't speak words, they remembered them. Don't forget me. I was here. I waited. I stayed quiet. I stayed kind. I stayed until I vanished. The shadows deepened around her. The light from the burner turned pale. She kept combing until the water began to boil, and in that moment she heard it. A single collective breath, not drawn in, but exhaled, as if the room had been holding it for years. Then silence, total. Even the burner's flame stilled, no longer flickering. She stopped combing. She looked up,
Across the room stood 4 burls, not solid, not spectral. Reflections. Their bodies faded at the edges, their faces blurred with grief and time. But their eyes, all looked at her, not with malice, but with hope. And one by one, they bowed, then turned and vanished into the walls. The air in the room shifted, lighter now, not cured, not clean, but clear, like the residue of a fever that had finally broken. She doused the flame, folded the cloth, and for the first time in days, she smiled. That night, she slept with her window open, and when the wind passed through, it no longer sounded like voices. It sounded like wind, and nothing else.
Ji-won awoke before dawn, not to a sound, but to the absence of it. Her apartment was silent, not the peaceful kind, the heavy, unnatural kind. The kind of silence that feels like a lid sealing something in. She sat up in bed. The air was dense, her chest tight. She listened. No voices, no walls whispering, no phones ringing. But something was wrong. She felt it in her bones, in the corners of the room, in her own breath. It was too quiet, as if the world around her had pressed pause, and she had been left behind, still moving. She stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent light above flickered once, then went out. The hallway didn't hum, didn't buzz, didn't breathe. It was still. She walked to the elevator. The display was frozen. No numbers, just a black screen. The call button didn't light up. She turned, back to her door, but it was no longer there. Where 703 had been was only a blank wall. No door, no number plate. Just concrete and paint, smooth and unbroken. Panic rose in her throat. She ran down the hall, past 704, 705, 706, but the numbers were missing, all of them. The doors still stood, but nameless, soulless, empty. She banged on them. No one answered. She screamed, but no sound came out. She clutched her throat, opened her mouth. Nothing. A scream that never left her lungs. She stumbled down the stairwell, hand trailing the cold railing. Each floor blurred into the next. No exit signs, no lights, just walls. Walls that felt closer than they should be, like the building itself was folding in on her. Then she saw it. A mirror, propped awkwardly against the wall at the base of the stairs. It hadn't been there before. She stepped closer. In the reflection, she saw herself, but not as she was. Pale, thinner, eyes hollow, mouth open in silent terror. She reached up to touch her face, and the reflection did not move. It just stared. And behind it, a girl, standing inches from her reflection. Her face was smudged, blurred like a thumbprint pressed to wet ink. But her mouth was wide open, impossibly wide, stretched in a scream. But no sound came from her either. The scream was inside the mirror, inside the silence, trapped, like a ghost shouting in a vacuum. Ji-won stumbled back, fell. The mirror cracked. But no noise came. The air did not echo. Even her breath made no sound. Then a voice. Not from the mirror, from inside her head. This is what it feels like. To vanish. To scream and go unheard. To rot in silence. To be real and erased. To never be remembered. She curled up on the stairs, hands over her ears. But the voice was not outside. It pulsed in her chest, in her blood. A memory that didn't belong to her, but now lived in her like a parasite. Then a whisper, faint, distant. Her own name. Ji-won, come back. You're not one of us. Not yet. A sharp ringing filled the stairwell. The phone. Not the mobile, the landline, but it was clearer than ever and louder. She ran back up the stairs, lungs burning, floor after floor, until she reached the hallway. Her door was back. The number glowed faintly. She opened the door. Inside was the phone, ringing, shrill, real. She picked it up. Hello? Nothing. Then a click, and sound rushed back into the world like a floodgate breaking. The refrigerator buzzed, the window rattled, a siren wailed in the distance. She gasped, sank to the floor. The phone slipped from her hand and dangled from the cord. She could still hear breathing on the other end, but not hers. That night she didn't dream. She didn't sleep. She sat in the middle of the room, lights off, surrounded by silence she could finally trust. Not because it was safe, but because it was no longer empty. She understood now. The scream wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a life, ignored, unheard, until it became a ghost. The landline no longer rang. Not at 3:33 a.m., not at all. It just waited. Coiled and quiet on the kitchen wall, its beige plastic stained with time, its receiver slightly crooked, as if forever halfway to someone's ear. Ji-won stood before it, arms crossed. She hadn't touched it in days, and yet she couldn't stop thinking about it. The soundless scream still echoed inside her chest. They had shown her what it meant to be forgotten, but no one had shown them what it meant to be remembered. At 3:30 a.m., she lit a candle. Not an offering, a promise. She pulled a chair to the wall, sat before the phone. The building around her held its breath, and then she picked up the receiver. The line was dead. Of course it was. But she didn't need a dial tone. She needed only intention. She pressed the numbers anyway. 604. 3 digits, a ritual disguised as routine. Then she held the receiver to her ear and whispered, "Can I speak with Eun-ha?" Silence. Then a soft crackle, like old tape rewinding. And then breathing, familiar, faint, followed by the rustle of fabric, a shuffle of feet, a chair being pushed back, and finally, a voice. "Is this room 703? Ji-won exhaled. "Yes." "You're early." "I didn't want to wait anymore." A pause.
No one ever calls me. That's why I'm calling. The voice on the other end was warmer now. Still distant, still layered in static and memory, but not angry, not lost, just lonely. Jiwan closed her eyes. She pictured the girl in her old school uniform sitting cross-legged on the floor of a room no one remembered, hands cradling a phone that had long since been disconnected, a room filled with dust and waiting. Jiwan asked gently, "Do you remember what happened?" The silence on the line stretched. Then, I tried to call my mother first. What did she say? She didn't pick up. And then, I called the house where I used to live. My name wasn't on the mailbox anymore. He had a new wife. So you called 604? Yes, because that's where I was. And what did you want to hear? A pause. Then, with the quiet heartbreak of a child still holding hope, I wanted someone to say, "I'm coming." Jiwan swallowed. Her throat ached. She whispered, "I'm here." The voice trembled, not with fear, with relief. I waited so long. I know. They said I should have left, that the door was open, but I didn't know how. You weren't forgotten. But I was. Not anymore. The line crackled again, and behind it, other voices. Not whispering, not crying. Just breathing. Dozens, hundreds, a chorus of souls finally heard. "Can I go now?" the girl asked. "You can." "Will it be dark?" "Only for a moment." A soft laugh. "That's okay. I'm not afraid of the dark anymore." Then, the faintest click, and the line went dead. But it didn't feel like loss. It felt like closure, like the door finally closing behind someone who had waited too long to leave. Jiwan placed the receiver gently back on the hook. The candle flickered once, but then burned steady. Outside, the wind picked up, not harsh, but cleansing. She opened the window. The city below still moved, still unaware. But in this room, something had changed. Not just the air, the silence. It no longer pressed against her. It held her, gently, like a hand closing softly around another. Later that morning, she returned to the 6th floor. Room 604 still stood, still sealed, but the talisman on the door, the one that had curled and rotted, was now flat, resting, at peace. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. As she turned to go, something caught her eye, a slip of paper tucked into the edge of the doorframe. She pulled it free. Written in soft, faded ink were just 4 words. "Thank you for calling." The wind carried something different now. Not cold, not dread, but absence. The kind you feel when a guest has finally left and the house can breathe again. Jiwan felt it in the floorboards, in the quiet corners of the kitchen, even in the phone, which now hung still and silent, like a relic from another life. Yunha was gone, but not erased, and that made all the difference. Still, the walls remembered more than one name.
The silence was no longer hostile, but it was crowded. Other echoes lingered, other voices, other unfinished rituals. She had heard them. Yunha, Kim So-yun, Chain Imai, Park Shae-jin. Girls who had vanished into quiet deaths, just like Yunha. Girls whose stories had never been told, whose bodies may have been buried, but whose grief had not. Ji-won could feel them watching, not from malice, from hope. She sought out a monk, not at a temple, but in a tiny basement space behind a flower shop. Someone who understood death not as a tragedy, but as a story that needed closing. He was quiet, middle-aged, dressed simply. When she told him about the building, about the deaths, the voices, the unanswered calls, he didn't flinch. He only asked, "Do you want them to move on?" "Yes," she said. "But more than that, I want them to be seen." He nodded. "Then you must do what no one else has done." "What's that?" "Hold the rights they never received." It took a week to prepare. She printed their names, hung their photos, grainy, pixelated, pulled from news clippings and old forums. 4 girls, 4 candles, each placed before a bowl of rice, a pair of chopsticks, a single flower. The monk brought bells, incense, a simple drum carved with lotus petals. He asked for silence, and Ji-won offered it, but the silence felt different now, sacred, not empty. He began the chanting, low, slow syllables that pulsed like heartbeat. And as the smoke curled toward the ceiling, Ji-won felt the building shift. The air grew dense, not suffocating, but solemn, as if the very walls had paused to listen. He called their names: Yoon In-ha, Kim So-yeon, Chain Imai, Park Shae-jin. And for each name, the candle flickered. For each name, the incense snapped. For each name, something unseen moved through the room. No wailing, no anger, only presence. The monk placed the final offering, a cup of water, before the last candle, then turned to Ji-won. "Say goodbye," he said softly. She stepped forward. Her voice shook. "I'm sorry no one came sooner. I'm sorry the world didn't listen. I'm sorry you were alone. You were real. You were here. And now you are free." The candles burned low. One by one, they extinguished. The room exhaled, and in that moment, the silence became something beautiful. Not absence, rest. The monk left quietly. Didn't charge her, didn't bless the apartment, didn't say, "Good luck." He simply bowed and whispered, "Now they know they were loved." Ji-won slept that night with the window open and the lights off. No fear, no calls, no dreams filled with mirrors and stairwells and hands reaching from the walls. Only sleep, true sleep. And when she woke, the apartment was lighter, not just in mood, in temperature, in tone, like the air had been cleansed. She went down to the 6th floor. Room 604 stood sealed, but something was different. The tape was gone. The talisman had fallen away. The dust near the threshold had been swept clean. No footsteps, no fingerprints, but Jiwan knew what it meant. She knelt, placed a single fresh lily at the base of the door, then whispered, "You don't have to knock anymore." Later that day, the building superintendent stopped her in the hallway. "Did you hear?" "What?" "Someone just signed the lease for 604. She blinked. "Really?" "First time in years. Some university student. Didn't even ask for a discount." He laughed. She didn't. She only nodded and whispered, "Make sure she's not alone." He paused. "Sorry?" "Nothing," she smiled. "Just check in sometimes." That night, as the city glowed below, she sat by her window and let the breeze move through her apartment. No calls, no knocking, no footsteps in the ceiling. Only the distant hum of life outside and the memory of girls who had finally been allowed to leave. A month passed, and for the first time since moving in, Jiwan began to forget. Not in the careless way most people forget, but in the gentle way we let go of nightmares. The apartment was quiet now. She'd removed the talisman from her door, washed the walls, painted over the faint water stain above her bed, bought a new rice cooker, started leaving music on again. Soft jazz in the mornings, the kind that filled the corners without waking the ghosts. Things were normal, peaceful, or almost. Room 604 had a new tenant, a first-year art student. Bright, polite, always wore headphones. She smiled at Jiwan in the elevator and bowed deeply every time they passed in the hallway. "I didn't even realize the unit had been empty," she said one day. "It feels old, but kind of calm, you know?" Jiwan only smiled back. She didn't say anything about the candles or the phone calls or the girls with no names. She didn't need to. Some ghosts are best buried in remembrance, not in warnings. Jiwan had started working again, freelance editing, remote. She filled her days with words, her nights with light cooking and quiet walks around the neighborhood. She'd even started dating someone. Nothing serious, but kind and real. Every so often, she would still wake at 3:33 a.m. Out of habit more than fear. She would glance at the clock, wait, listen, and hear nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the low creak of old wood, the quiet peace of the living. Until one night, she heard the phone ring. Not loudly, not even fully, just one short chime. A hiccup of sound, as if the line had flickered. She turned her head slowly toward the kitchen wall. The landline hadn't moved, still unplugged, still coiled like a resting snake. She got up, walked to it, picked up the receiver. No dial tone, no static, only silence. But this time, the silence felt different, familiar, warm. She pressed the receiver to her ear and whispered, "Hello?" A long pause. Then, "Just checking." Her heart paused. The voice was faint, playful. Not Unha, not the others. Someone new. "Who is this?" A soft laugh. "Does it matter?" And then, click. She hung up the phone, but didn't feel fear, only a strange sadness, and something else,
something she couldn't name. The next morning, the new tenant from 604 stopped her in the hallway. "Hey, can I ask something weird?" Jiwon nodded slowly. "Does the intercom sometimes, buzz in the middle of the night?" Jiwon smiled. "Yes, sometimes." "And the elevator? Does it ever stop on the wrong floor?" Another smile. "Once or twice." "Huh. It's not creepy, just kind of strange, like the building is listening." Jiwon nodded. "It is." She said goodbye and walked to the corner store. Bought milk, an orange, a small bouquet of white flowers without really thinking about it. She returned home, placed the flowers on the table beside the phone, and whispered, "For whoever's still waiting." That night, the wind carried no messages. The walls were quiet. But the phone, the old beige landline with the crooked receiver, glowed faintly in the dark, just for a second, a flicker of life, as if someone, somewhere, had just picked up the other end. Because some lines never really go dead. Some voices never really stop calling. And some rooms never truly empty.